audit is to provide an opinion in all material respects of the various opinion units of the financial statements. And so your city financial statements are broken out into individual fund presentation for the major funds and also an aggregate. Just to put it in perspective, when we talk about whether or not the balances and financial statements are presented materially correct, the general fund materiality was 62,000 versus like the water fund materiality is 100,000. Park and Rec was 23,000. So the size of each individual fund depends on how deep we go into the numbers versus looking at it all transactions and balances. The materiality is used to look at the fund as a whole. So the city's opinion units this year, because of a new lease standard that was not implemented, and therefore the the general fund, the park and rec, and then also the aggregate city financials as a whole received a modified opinion, which is qualified, basically because you did not report leases as a long-term liability and the and receivables for your long-term leases. They were basically presented as they were in the past, typically on more of the cash basis, what you paid in rent to utilize facilities or what you collected was received as, recorded as revenues and expenses. The rest of the funds that really did not have any lease activity that was associated with them all received the unmodified opinion that you would have received in the past. That states that they were fairly presented in all material respects. In addition to the audit of the financial statement, the state auditor's office has select statutes that they require us to review for compliance. So this year we did have one compliance finding related to those statutes. It's a pretty small one. There's a report that the city is supposed to send to the county regarding your debt, which at the end of every year that gets accumulated and sent down to the state. And that report was not completed during the year. So
when is it normally due?
Usually it is supposed to be due February 1st.
So February 1st of last year it was not submitted?
Yep. So it wasn't, it was completed after we requested to review the document. It had never been.
So that was when, like in the last couple of months?
Yeah, I don't remember this specific, yeah.
Okay.
So everything is cleared up with the county from that standpoint. But so it's just kind of an item that we'll kind of address with the other findings as far as making sure the reports and all the compliance areas and the reconciliations are keeping up to date. So as part of the audit, we have to gain an understanding of your internal controls as well, as far as part of our planning procedures and how we're going to create which areas to look at. We don't do a full audit of your internal controls, but if we do come into or find any issues related to those control procedures over your finances, they're supposed to be included in the audit report. There's two levels, significant deficiencies and material weaknesses. With material weaknesses being the more severe, we did include 4 findings related to internal controls that we thought were material weaknesses. The first one was financial statement preparation. That's one that's actually pretty common. As the audit firm, we prepared the financial statements, which we do for actually all of our clients. The main thing is to get an understanding of the full gap and reporting requirements and the note disclosures to kind of mitigate and reduce that risk of there being an error in your financials. But I guess that's, like I said, one that's very common for the clients that we work with, and I wouldn't expect any concerns related to that one. The second one is material audit adjustments. There were quite a few large adjustments that we had to make that were material to the overall balances, and as an audit firm, we can't be part of your internal control, so if we define the audit adjustment to be made, then that is something that you should look at as far as your year-end control procedures. The audit adjustments related to depreciation and some capital asset additions making sure, kind of doing a reconciliation, I think was our recommendation, that they, the initial procedure is solid as far as determining which assets to capitalize, but there should be some more monitoring and a review to ensure that they all get included. Also, reviewing, some of the reports are not, they don't flow really from where sometimes the assets were purchased to where they get included as far as depreciation when you start looking at where everything is recorded. And so that's not just a current year procedure, that seems like to be an ongoing issue. And so just to ensure that you have the proper financial reporting balances, something to review. Another material audit adjustment we had had to do with the revenue from federal standpoint. One federal grant was recorded as county revenue. The key there is because of federal requirements as far as your financial reporting. Whenever you exceed that threshold of $750,000, the city has additional reporting requirements, so it's important that you classify the grants properly. In addition, one of them was put in the wrong fund, so therefore it was receipted in one fund, spent in another. So ensure that your cash in each fund and making decisions on what your reserves are, making sure that those receipts are recorded in the funds that they intend to be used. A third one had to do with your special assessments. There was some adjustments there as far as what you're going to collect in the future, and so therefore, to help the council make proper decisions, ensuring that all of those receivables are recorded, and so you know what your future collections are on some of these construction projects. The last one, there was an adjustment to inventory, and it did relate from prior years. Actually, this was the land that's associated with Cheetah and Jobs. The liability was presented that is really only a liability if you sell the property, so therefore to offset that fund, it looks like it's really a large deficit balance in prior years. The offsetting inventory is there, so really the fund balance was increased in that fund so that it showed the assets that would be sold that would create the liability. The last finding had to do, the third finding had to do with fund balance classifications. A lot of the discussion, the system tracks the fund balance from an individual basis. However, it was, again, kind of that reconciliation monitoring process was not there to determine whether or not they are being updated properly and to determine proper balances and also how those funds should be spent. What was the source of a lot of those restrictions and classifications, and then whether or not those funds were used. So again, it's more of the year-end monitoring process to ensure that the numbers are updated properly. And then the last one had to do with the capital assets, which kind of goes with the adjustments we talked about before. Does anybody have any questions so far? So from the overall standpoint of your assets, so as far as there was the additional handout to kind of go along with what I'm discussing today, and so if you go to page 9 of that, as far as that was in your, so the balance sheet for those opinion units in the governmental funds, I know fund balance has been a discussion point. Currently at the end of the year, 2.7 million is what your fund balance was in the general fund that is unassigned. So at the end of the year, when you're looking at what you have in reserves as far as available to spend, that would give you at 5.5 months of operating expenses. But included in that balance, the street construction fund has a deficit of 1.24 million. So negative cash can't be presented in the financial statements because somebody had to lend the cash. And so included in the general fund, there's a receivable for 1.4 million. Well, 1.2 of it is related to the street construction repaying those funds. And so if an additional revenue streams aren't able to recoup that 1.2 million, then the general fund's unassigned fund balance would only have 3 months worth of reserves in it. Okay. Now with that, there is committed and assigned fund balances, and those are, commitments are designated by the council for use. If you go to page 10 of that handout, it shows the breakdown of the fund balance between non-spendable, restricted, committed, and assigned. So the committed fund balance is from council authority of how to utilize those funds, where you have the fire truck severance, pest control, DNSF settlement, and those can be uncommitted by council action. So the higher the action, whatever action designated those funds for future use, if you decide you need those funds anymore as a reserve, then those can be undesignated by the council.
So we're looking at page 10.
Yes,
So which funds can be undesignated?
committed and assigned. So the fund balance categories are as they're presented. The overall fund balance is broken into 5 categories: non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. And so restricted is outside source. That's designated outside, usually by wherever you receive the funds. Committed and assigned are internal designations. So if you decide that, for example, if you end up getting a different grant for a fire truck, so the council can uncommit the $340,000 from the fire truck to utilize a different way. Same thing, pest control. The assigned balance depends on who assigned it. That can be, sometimes it's done internally through budgets and in the finance department. That can be undesignated as well, depending on the use. But that's where the hard part with looking at the source of a lot of these designations is the action that designated either has to be used in that manner or it needs to be undesignated through the same action. So if it was budget or whether it was council approval, that's the variations in those fund balances. And so overall, if you consider the committed, assigned, and unassigned, the general fund had about 10.6 months of operations in reserves. But it just depends on how you're going to utilize those reserves going forward.
And when you say it has 10.6, what is the monthly operating budget?
I guess I don't have the monthly operating. That comes from the current operating expenses for the year. And that was so that was about 5.8 million for annual.
So if I want to get to a number where I want to see how much, I'm trying to get to a number where I'm looking at the unrestricted money that we have on hand. And I want to see how much that grows each year. So, I mean, if the way I look at it, and probably the way some taxpayers look at it, say if we taxed our city residents X amount, but then we didn't use all that money for the year, we use less, then it's my thinking that money we could use in part for the kitty for the following year, because that was tax dollars that we said we were gonna spend and we didn't. So where do I find that number, and how do I find how that number grew from year to year? And then is it a bunch of different line items, or can you point to just one line item?
So that would be the unassigned fund balance. So if you look at that handout on page 9, underneath the general fund, there's an unassigned balance of 2.7 million. Sorry.
But then earlier you said,
But there's also committed and assigned, and those committed funds can be uncommitted by council if we so choose?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that the same with assigned as well?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And that's what you have to look at as your future needs. And that's the reason for the committed and the assigned being there is so that you don't have a shortfall if you know you have a large expense. So example, for the fire truck, let's say. So if you knew in 2 years you were gonna be purchasing that fire truck, you don't wanna get your reserves down, so you have a shortfall that you can't cover in a couple of years. And so that's the reason for utilizing those assigned and committed designations. And so, yeah, you're at 2.7 million, and you're at 2.747 last year. So it actually went down $45,000 on your unassigned.
Okay. So really, that's the number we really should be looking at as a barometer to, I mean, I was thinking that maybe as a council, we decide that unassigned fund, we should agree that it should be at a certain, we should try to keep it at a certain amount. Let's just throw out round numbers of like, say, 3 million. So we try to keep it at 3 million or 2.5 or 2 or whatever we decide to keep it at, then, I mean, is that a healthy unassigned amount for a city to have, or is that, because through my time as being on council, I've heard we have too much of a reserve or different things like that, and when people say that to me, I'm like, I don't know, how can that be unhealthy to have too much of a reserve? How, does that negatively affect us ever to have a higher number?
I can't think of where it would hurt you. What the argument is, yes, like you said, what are you need to be, are you overtaxing? Would be,
Right.
yes, would be the question, or why you need that reserves.
Because I've heard
and
over
that-
the years, we've just grown our unrestricted fund a lot over the years, and that's why we're at this point. So I'm trying to figure out, at some point in time, maybe we continue to overtax, but you said from last year, we went down. So obviously not the case from last year to this year.
Well,
Right.
just in looking at what it says on here is the city had adopted a formal fund balance policy of 45%, which would be of approximately 1.3 million, right? But then I also take into consideration that our street construction was over 1.2 million. And so even if we did an operating budget of, with whatever that is, like, was it like $480,000 per month, right? And times that out, like, would we be in a hurt locker with not have had what we have now, right? So I think it's also, it's not just considering the operating budget, but also like these significant costs that come up were way over extended on a street project or something of that nature. And I don't know, I wonder if 2.7 is too much. I don't know if I feel that it would be.
Right,
you know?
I'm not saying that it is too much, I'm
Yeah.
just, in the past, I've heard different numbers that a city should be X amount of, budget, or you should have on hand operating budget to,
And haven't we
Yeah.
heard like anywhere from like 40 to 60%? That's what I keep hearing.
Yeah, 2 to 5 months is also a number, and so that's what we do, basically your percentage times with 12 months. Usually like 2 to 5 months is a kind of a ballpark, depending on what your operations are and your cash flows. And so that's where, when you look at the 2.7, if it stays at 2.7, you're on the high side at 5.5 months, right? But if you lose let's say you don't have the additional revenue coming in to cover the 1.2 million, now you're down to 3. So now you're,
Right.
kind of right in the middle.
Right.
And that is where also, I always say, look at your 5 and 10 year plan on the committed, because that's where you can utilize the committed and assigned fund balances to make sure that you don't, if you have the reserves, but you know you have an expense coming up, that you don't end up having a shortfall and have to go out and find a bunch of financing. But yeah, that is something that, the unassigned balance, as far as how many months of operations, to kind of look at is a good
and
number.
situations that could happen, which I've heard about, is not getting our LGA. Is that even plausible? I mean, is that where, I mean, if that the state would just decide not to hand out LGA or cut it dramatically or anything, is That's the reason why I've been told to have so much on hand in case that ever does happen. Is that a realistic?
I do have one, yeah, that doesn't get LGA, because of their fund balance. I know they did just revamp, they just looked at changing the formula again, so I don't know where and how it would affect you. Especially if you're sitting in that 2 to 5 months, it's not gonna be, wouldn't be an issue.
So if you had let's just say you had a 3-year, instead of a 2 to 5 months, this is, say it was dramatically higher, would that affect our LGA?
I'd have to look into that. I don't wanna say yes or no for your
I guess-
city into the formula, so.
I guess I've heard too, if you got too healthy of a fund balance, you'll get your LGA, but
I
you
know,
could get less.
I've just heard, but I haven't heard anything where it's an actual fact. I've just,
Right.
you know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
yeah.
Same here.
I do wonder if with the new formula coming out, if like your current balances are considered, because if they're not considered, I guess that would be my other question. Isn't it based on more like your population and things of that nature?
Cause I think the one that it was my understanding, the one entity that I've worked with for years that has never gotten LGA will probably get some now, that they anticipate some more money going out state, but again, without running the numbers, I don't wanna.
Just for argument's sake, is it possible for you to find out if there's such a thing, it was too much that would affect our LGA and just report it back to Audrey or?
Yeah, yep, I can look into it.
I think the other thing, Delaney, for us to consider too, with us almost losing $2 million by not submitting our audit on time, those are things that I also think about that are of concern to me, and us needing to keep that in mind as well.
Well, sure, but I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen,
Yes.
again, but I mean,
But I just wonder if we had lost that, then we wouldn't have, 2.7 there anymore, we'd have $700,000. And that could have been pretty significant as well. So just being conscious of those other things that are maybe not as considered.
right, but my whole point behind all this talk about the unrestricted funds is I want us as a council to decide what we should have. And then once that number is determined, if we grow significantly from one year to the next, that's where I feel, that's a situation where we probably have overtaxed our citizens. And then I think we should have a discussion at that point. What do we want to do with that amount of money that increased over the previous year? Now, obviously, in this situation, we're not talking about that because we went backwards, it sounds like, from last year and the unrestricted, correct?
Yeah, yep.
But Delane, you're just looking at, if we got a healthy unrestricted at the end of the year, use that to lower our tax levy.
Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
if we get to a number,
Yeah.
and then we're looking at our budgets, and we had, like this year, we started out with a high number. Well, it'd be nice to have the excess that we didn't spend from last year to throw in the kitty, to say, okay, by using this, we already just lowered our levy
A couple more,
10% without
yeah.
even
yeah,
doing any work.
yeah.
So that's the point, I think, as, then it's all, it's not even a talking point if it went backwards and it's gone, but it's been such a problem for us to have this conversation because we've never known what that number was
Right.
ever.
What the
and-
reserves is, it was this kind of fantasy number that we never really got a
So-
solid understanding of.
Okay.
Realistically, when should I have that number? In March?
Well, I think the way your accounting system is created, I believe, Audrey can speak better to that, but there should be able to get current numbers from your system.
Okay, so if I ask this question again in March from one year to the next year, at least before we start our budget talks, I should at least be able to have how much that number grew or shrank from the prior year, correct?
Delaney, the one thing I would consider as well, and I know that we're, working on trying to get like a financial business plan for the city. And I wonder if that's also going to be able to kind of dictate our decision about how much we should have in those reserves. Because one of the things that he had mentioned was like also looking at like our 5 and 10-year capital improvement project or what we have out there. And I think that we also need to consider what are those things that are coming up that we haven't necessarily have all the funding for, and are we going to push it to another year, or do we use some of those reserves to be able to fix that project? So I don't think it's just as simple as us saying 45% is a good amount.
Well,
I think
like I said, right now, I'm open to what that number should be.
right.
I'm just concerned about if we're gonna grow, we should be able to speak to the citizens as to why we overtaxed them and didn't spend the money.
Absolutely.
If
And
they say, you know, you said you levied for this amount of money to be spent, and you didn't spend it, so what happens to all that money? And I'm like, well, I don't know, we're just gonna find some other stuff to
yeah,
spend.
I mean, I
That's-
think you bring up a good point. I also think that for us to make a more educated decision as to what that number is that we need to be able to have a more holistic understanding.
Because we don't budget to increase our.
No,
Right.
no, we're trying to cover.
Right.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. I also think that, you know, part of the issue this year is that we weren't able really to get those numbers in that budget in on a sooner schedule, like it should have been in June. And so I think that also contributed to us having to make some of these decisions a little bit more
Well, I get that, but
untimely.
I don't know if we have a discussion as a council, it's not now or anytime soon, but maybe before the next budget season, what we think these numbers should be at. We should try to strive to keep it at that number. So then maybe, let's just say it goes down dramatically, then how do we recover? Do we levy to recover? You know, or is that a,
Yeah,
you know, is that a situation we should be at, or,
right.
you know?
I think, again, having the business plan in place is actually to be able to dictate a lot of this. So I don't know if we have all the answers right now, but I totally agree with you and us, like, being able to be more purposeful about what that assessment will be going forward. I just don't think this was an ideal year. And I know that in the past, obviously, we've struggled with that, and I'm hoping that we'll have a better understanding and be able to make that more of an educated decision, as well as being able to articulate that to the constituents, you know?
Right. Okay.
So I guess the next, I was just gonna touch base on on page 11, is your water and wastewater fund balances. So they are actually, you know, from a an operating reserve standpoint, we're at 8.5 months and 8.3 months. So, you know, a decent reserve. Obviously, that also goes into your 5 and 10-year plan of what projects you have expected coming up. One item I wanted to point out as well is in the long-term liabilities, there's 2 lines, net pension liability and other post-employment benefit liability. Those are just accounting estimates, and you don't have any cash flows or any payment schedules associated with those. Those are based off of actuarial numbers that are really out of your control for the most part. And so the liabilities associated with this statement get skewed from an operating cash flow. So just know that there's no liability associated with that when you see net pension liability and other post-employment benefit liability. Because then if you look on the page 12, we're actually looking at the cash flows from operations. They're operating for the water fund, had a pretty good cash flow from operations for the year, 323,000. Now, 226 of that does get transferred out to the improvement fund. Where the wastewater fund did have a loss of 86,000, and I think last year was about a $3,000 increase in cash flow from operations, but you do have the rate increase going in, that started in 2023, so hopefully that'll support your operating cash flows a little better. Because one thing you do want to make sure is included in that cash flow from operations isn't depreciation. And from a enterprise fund standpoint, you want to make sure you are funding that depreciation for future projects and repairs and maintenance.
So does that go back to them, all of the capital assets not being noted? Or just us not devaluing or depreciating them appropriately?
No, it's just ensuring that when you're looking at your, so they are depreciated in this report. It's not organized and as clean as it probably should be to help with those amounts. That was the finding related to, but as far as the depreciation in here, so depreciation is not part of the cash flow statement. So that's where sometimes you get an even cash flow, so then it keeps your reserves, but then as your system is getting older, you don't have those reserves to cover those costs. And so then you just have to look, and again, that kind of goes to that 5-10 year plan as well, as far as how do you want to fund these major repairs coming up, as far as interest rates are higher than we've been used to. People have started to go from 10 years ago just saying, we'll just finance it, to wanting to not quite get as much debt. So that's just something to look for. Going forward, when you're looking at your budget, you really want to include that depreciation expense in your budget to ensure that you're covering that use and that depreciation on those assets.
So going forward, you're suggesting that we budget more for those? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that
Well,
would be,
just include that in your analysis when you're looking at your budget. It's not just the cash in, cash out type maintenance, because then what happens is when you get those big repairs of a water main breaks and equipment breakdowns, you don't have that reserve in place if you're just looking for a net cash flow of zero.
Sure.
So for basically, the wastewater is the one. Right now, you're sitting at about 8 months in fund balance there for future reserves, but just looking at that cash flow. But again, you did have the rate increase, so hopefully 23 and going forward, you'll have that funding. So on page 14 was just a summary of all of your funds, and just where they went from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And that's where you can see the capital project fund basically didn't have any revenue associated with the project to cover, right? That was all covered by reserves. And so the $1.24 million deficit either has to be covered by either the general funds reserves or the municipal land and building project does have 1.2 million in it. But again, I don't know if you've got that designated, I don't know what is the use, or if you're expecting those funds for future projects. So that might be one thing that will make it easier going forward with your construction projects, is to look at consolidating some of those capital project funds that don't have a specific revenue source. So if you are putting in the LGA or putting in reserves in there, that way you don't, because there's been money kind of going back and forth between street construction, municipal land and building, the improvement funds, just to kind of, some funds have the money versus the project is recorded in another fund based off their needs. And so if the cash isn't restricted for a specific fund, it might make the budgeting process easier if that gets consolidated and just projects are tracked internally, and then your revenue sources that can be used for any capital project then don't have to get moved from one fund to the other, or determine whether or not you have the cash available in that specific fund. So on page 15, at the bottom, there was a note in the financial statement, page 58, that covered up prior period adjustments, so just wanted to address, so the council is aware of that. First one we already talked about was the inventory classification as far as the land being available for sale with the cheetah and jobs, acquisitions, and potential liabilities if the land is sold, just so that the inventory offsets that liability that was included on the books. The other one was, it was immaterial, but it was asked to be included when we found it, that the Fire Relief Association loan, $100,000 loan receivable was not included on the balance sheet in the past. So the $10,000 a year collection was added as a receivable to the financial statements. But the $60,000 ended up, it was immaterial to the overall financial statements, again, with that materiality basis, looking at the different funds, but it was added, it was still added. The last few pages, there's a required communication to the council. It's included with all audits, and so the kind of the main couple of points on page 16, 17, 18, and 19. The middle of page 1 talks about the different accounting policies. The no new accounting policies were adopted, and that's because you did not adopt the lease implementation. So if that's adopted next year, then that will be included in there. At the bottom of that page, and as well as the top, it talks about some of the significant estimates that are in financials. And the two main ones are that pension liability and the OPEB liability. So there's some large liabilities, they're estimates, they're non-cash flow related, and just so that, you know, those are affecting the balances but aren't actual hard numbers. Middle of page 2, that there is a note, just to be aware, and I think you're already aware of it, I guess, of the difficulties encountered in performing the audit. So we did note the delay in the timeline of getting the audit started for the delayed responses during the initial planning stages.
And when was that started?
I mean, when was initial communication started?
Yeah.
I mean, March and April. I mean, we met quite a few. I mean, it was ongoing throughout the spring.
Is there a recommendation of how the council could be made aware of such requests from our audit department? I guess that maybe we should have been asking some questions before. You know, because it kind of like in the situation, we kind of find out about it at the 11th hour, and we're like, so how do you recommend that we as council people be proactive in a situation like this?
I guess I don't know what kind of answers you were, I don't know what you were getting out of your audit department. Obviously, if you have a question, you can contact me directly. I don't have, you know, at any point. I have no issue with that. Yeah, I guess I don't know what kind of answers, if you were given a timeline or expected, if you thought it was gonna be completed.
What I'm getting at, it's kind of hard for us to take any action or ask questions if we don't know that there's an issue.
Okay.
I think that would fall not necessarily on the auditor, but also on the city administrator and letting us know that and him being aware and abreast of the situation as
Right.
well. I don't know if our auditor is going to be the one that would share that.
Is there such a thing, I mean, I think we're gonna talk about that later, about is there like timelines that an audit department could provide us that we could just simply have and ask questions as the year goes on? Says, hey, do we have this report done and hand it in, and just different things like that, or?
As far as, required reporting to the,
Yeah.
to the state and things, there is a general schedule for municipalities. I mean, I guess it's in a big schedule of timeline dates for a bunch of different governmental entities.
The League of Minnesota Cities also has a lot of that information available.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
The main one, obviously, it's June, obviously, June 30th is the initial report deadline, for gap basis cities. I guess, again, it kind of goes when information is available and ready to go.
So, and I'd ask this of you, Corky, and I know I haven't got a response yet, but if the audit was due on June 30th, we have the ability to ask for an extension for 45 days, which would put us at August 14th. Did we get another extension to allow us to not turn our audit in until September 30th? How did that work?
I think John can answer that better than I can. Yes, we did. The audit is finally due, I believe, on September 30th. There are various guideposts along the way where you can get extensions, yes.
So you continue to get extensions from August to September?
So, yeah, well, September 30th is losing of LGA, so that's the deadline drop dead. The other ones, I guess I don't always look at the payment schedule, but it's when you're getting your LGA payment. If you know, June 30th, the normal deadline, you're getting your payment on time, and then
So it's 45 days is your next extension, right?
August 15th, then it has, because then that goes into that timeline of LGA payments, and then September 30th, then that adjusts your.
So then that delays our LGA?
Yeah.
Okay, and by how much?
I did not look. I really, this is,
Okay.
I haven't had a September 30th filing.
Ever?
No, I should say it when I was, well, I've seen it one other time, but I was not,
Sure.
I was staff level at that point.
So if I understand correctly, we started back April, May, or whatever, March, whenever we started, and you guys were requesting information, was it just zero communication, or the correct information was not sent over, or what exactly was the communication breakdown?
So, some of the stuff we just didn't get. Obviously, the big one was the lease one. That was, because we knew that was gonna be a time-consuming item. Some of the other ones where the information we received, and this goes into the reconciliation and like I said, the organization of the fixed assets, when you're kind of getting two reports and they don't really reconcile, right? If this asset was purchased out of the water fund, and we're seeing the depreciation expense in the general fund, or the way it's coded, and also just reconciling some of the totals was the issue, and that's where a lot of the answers. So then a lot of the follow-up questions, we weren't getting answers for those.
Like, there was just no response, or it was just walking around the answers?
And I'll admit it depended on the question. Some of them was no response, and they just, or you ask for 5 things, you get 3 of them, included the other 2, and that was the main issue.
And was that with just the former director of finance, or just do you feel the whole way through?
No, it was more, just the former. Obviously, the big thing with that transition is when somebody isn't here, it's hard for them to get answers, and there's, some timeline, but the process definitely improved.
Can we find out how delayed the LGA will be? And I'm assuming there's no concerns with covering until we get it then, since it's now delayed. Audrey?
I don't have an answer as to how long our second LGA payment will be delayed. I do have plans of calling the state auditor's office tomorrow to get a clear answer to that question.
Thank you. Have we always known that the LGA would be delayed by this? Were you guys made aware of that?
I was not made aware of that, no. Once we add the extensions, we always were pointing to the September 30th deadline to make that go through and meet it, but no.
Is there anything else we should be aware of that would be side effects of us being delayed besides the delayment of payment?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there isn't any other, that is the penalty they hold over the cities for submitting. And so that officially, it was sent in, it's confirmed as received. So I would imagine you're just on your list. They did the follow-up questions that they normally do on reporting, and I don't, as far as they accepted the answers, I haven't heard anything back as far as, they typically inquire about different items on state reporting form that goes with
Sure.
the financial statements, and so if they didn't have follow-up on that,
So we had
there's no issues that I'm aware of.
Okay. And then we also had a delay of payment last year then, since we turned it in late?
Not my understanding that we had any delay last year.
We had a 45 extension. It was not submitted on the 30th, it was submitted on August 14th, or I'm sorry, August 18th, and our extension was till the 15th of August.
I can look for that answer, I don't have it for you. I don't know that we were delayed.
the record shows. You can check with Ashley on that one. Thank you.
And so one item, I guess, with a lot of these findings, obviously with the timeline of the communication with them during the, the late stages of the audit, and also still short a staff member, I'll admit, I kind of anticipate a lot of them being there again. And so I'm not sure, like I said, as far as timeline going forward, that's one thing that I guess I would look into is that's usually what happens is time of daily operations versus that monitoring and having enough staff available to do the monitoring side and get those procedures implemented. You have to have the staffing time available as well.
And I think that's something we're actually looking into right now with the.
Oh, we talked about it, but then we're looking at other options instead of just agreeing to hire a person.
Well, we're
Right.
looking at options to have somebody come in and do what's best practices for those things to help implement them.
Right, I mean, I just think we move forward and hire a person. It's my opinion, but
I feel like we're very delayed because we haven't had the people doing the job that they should have been doing in the first place. And so I would like to see us get up to par and back on track, and then actually look at our bandwidth to see if we actually really need another person.
I think we
or if
do.
it was
I
just that we
mean-
were so backlogged by what we were doing. But I think the other part that's probably more important is regardless of who we would hire, I think we need a specialty group like Ellers or some kind of group that does those types of things and comes in and shows us best practices to help implement some of the suggested things the auditor puts forth.
Audrey, what do you feel you need?
Right now, to meet our 2023 audit with the turnover that we have seen so far, we do need to have a company come in and help assist us catch up, and within that time frame also provide a department assessment that would indicate whether or not they agree that we need to have an additional accounting staff, or if we need to look at our efficiencies better and redefine the roles of the positions that we currently have.
I think that's a good way of doing it. Have a more educated understanding of what you're doing.
And just so you know, that's the second item on the agenda
Yep.
tonight.
Yep.
Okay, anything else on the audit report? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to say this out loud. For the amount of things that we received on Friday, I feel that it was a lot of information to take in. I still feel that I personally would like to review a lot of this, and I might have more follow-up questions. In the future, I would like to see if we're presented with this much data, that it's not given to us the Friday before the Monday meeting, in order for us to really get a good understanding and a good handle on what we're looking over, and being able to better comprehend this, as well as giving us a little bit more time than a weekend.
well, I think the reason is we're under such a time crunch now to get all this information in before the end of the year, and
I agree, but I also don't think that we should be making any rush decisions on such significant information. And I don't think it hurts to give us a week or so to look at this before we do it.
It's my understanding that these, the audit was sent 2 weeks ago electronically.
The report,
The full audit report, yes.
the report that you sent yesterday or
I
Friday.
believe the full financial audit was available by email to all council October 17th.
This report.
Yes, the
Full report.
audited financials.
Okay.
We got it on the,
Yes.
Yep.
I thought this was something separate from that.
No, same thing.
No, I
yeah,
remember
it was right
reading
here.
through it.
it's on the,
Yeah.
Yep.
it's on the computer.
Okay. Thank you.
Didn't print it out.
Okay, moving on, proposals for accounting service. Now, everybody got the memo, we don't mention the name of the company, they're all 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes, it's very important at this point that as you discuss and offer your comments, that in this instance, you refer to the number of the submitting entity.
So I'll open it up, any thoughts?
So I'd like to hear from Audrey on what her thoughts would be.
Yeah, that would be good.
First, I'd like to start out by thanking you for taking the time to review the proposals that were provided. I'd also like to remind you that it is myself and the finance team that will be working very closely with the company that is selected. So my recommendation is option 2. Some of the companies who prepared a proposal required transactions to be entered by the city before they can begin reconciling. The reason for requesting proposals was reaching out for assistance to catch us up on those transactions. So I feel that with option 2, having their staff available to assist us in getting that data entered is very crucial.
And are they readily available?
This company has given the option to be on-site or remote. We're the ones driving that. Whereas some of the proposals, you will see that they are very restrictive in terms of it's remotely with a very set number of days available during a month for on-site visits. Option 2, it's totally up to us whether or not we want them to come on-site or if we want them remote. Or I guess I'm seeing it where we have them come on-site, and as we go through the process, we will then see things that are better able to take on remotely because they will be fully equipped with the information that they need to take that on, such as like scanning in a lot of the bank activity. Right now, staff does not have time to do that scanning, and this company, option 2, would be able to assist us in getting that process set up for remote work.
So basically, we would have to invest in some update with the IT technology or whatever?
I think right now, as far as IT requirements would be just to have a company laptop that would have Encode available and also the access to our network. Another thing is option 2 is gonna be able to provide us a step-by-step training for our finance staff, which can be done as we, again, progress through this process, or after they do our assessment and we have a full, better understanding of what our staffing needs are. As we bring in staff, hopefully 2, but as we bring in staff, they then can acclimate that new hire with the processes that we are now going to be moving forward with.
So as far as timeline, how long do you think it would take to get, I guess, you to be where you need to be?
That's a really good question. I, along with the 4 companies and with Corky in our discussions, we've been trying to identify that timeline exactly, like how many hours per bank reconciliation, or how many hours does it take to close a month? I've been here in the finance director role for 5 months. We haven't even walked through that process yet, so I can't even tell you how long our processes take to close out those tasks. But I do feel that once we get a
month or two under our belts, we can then update you as far as, okay, this is what we're seeing, how long or how many hours we need to take to do a bank rec or do a month end, so that we can better analyze how much this additional accounting service is gonna cost us to catch us up.
And Audrey, if I may just kick in, Your Honor, to your question about whether or not more IT resources are needed in regards to what Audrey had to say about scanning, it's not the technology, it's the time and the individual required to feed the scanner and to collect all those documents and get them scanned in. It's a laborious and time-consuming process that requires someone on site to do.
So is it this agency that we would hire, is it possible that you would have to hire some additional help to get some of the scanning done, or are they gonna provide all that service and hire their own people to get this stuff done?
With option 2, we have full access to the staff that they have. We would not have to hire additional staff. Now, if we went with a different option, we are gonna have to have that conversation.
Okay,
So this is the only company that would come on site and do a lot of that work?
Again, some of the proposals have the on-site option, but we are really limited as to the number of days that they are going to provide on-site services. Option 2 does not provide a limitation. It's totally up to us driving, whether it's on-site or remote.
well, I mean, from, my recommendation is, as we listen to what Audrey wants, and it sounds to me option 2 is, what's she's fighting for option 2, it sounds like to me.
The other thing with option 2 is, of the proposals that provided an assessment, they were the only ones that provided a clear timeline. We know exactly how many weeks we are going to have an assessment complete, and I really like that idea because we would still be in the window for our '24 budget. So if it ends up where the additional staff that I think is required might not be necessary, we still have that time to remove that additional position.
So is there any, and probably haven't done it yet, but is it possible to reach out to some other entities that they've done this service for, just to see how they?
They did offer references. I certainly can reach out. I have not reached out to any of the proposals' references, but I can certainly do that.
Are you familiar with this company?
I have not personally worked with them. I do have friends, colleagues that have worked with them and are very pleased with the services that they provided.
So we have to, we're just getting a consensus tonight of that, and then we vote on it at a council meeting, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So then by the time, I'm thinking you're gonna get the consensus tonight for option 2. By the time we vote on it, could you check some of the references and maybe report to us of how they, I'm sure they're gonna give you, but I'd just like you to check them out, just to do that.
It's our anticipation that if there is a consensus tonight, between Audrey and myself, we would check any references, other people who've worked with them, and have a resolution available for you on Monday night.
And looking at the cost for
Was
these
there
other,
a timeline outside of what we're being presented here that you were given?
No. What's in the proposal is what I was provided.
in reading
Did I
over
miss,
the,
like, what
in
page
reading
the
over
timeline was on?
the presentations here, it looks
Are-
like this.
So I just want to clarify, I'm sorry, Don. I just want to clarify that when I say option 2, I am referring to the option 2 that was referenced in Ashley's email when the packet was submitted.
Which is also on their file name, correct?
I think the options were
Is it this right
different
here?
from the agenda.
Option 2,
Yep.
option 2
Okay,
is,
I'm not seeing, do you see it?
CLA.
A proposed deadline? I don't see a timeline on this one.
I can put it up on the TV screens and keep the cameras off
Uh,
them if it's helpful for discussion and
Well,
reference.
I'm just looking for the timeline, that's all I was looking for.
timeline.
is it this one that has the marks on it?
Number 2.
She says different than this, number 2 is not here.
Number 2 is not here.
Not on,
The timeline for the assessment for option 2 is found on page 4 of their proposal.
That's number 2, right?
Yes.
this one.
Yes.
Okay,
And looking at the timelines and so forth.
Is this what
and
you're talking about right
Cost
here?
of each of these, I think that's the best proposal is option 2.
Can you repeat that, please? I'm sorry.
I said, in looking and reading over the options that we have, I think that option 2, because of the timeline and the cost, that this is probably the best one, number 2.
Thank you, I agree.
did you have a second?
I did. I would have to say, if I was pushed and needed to have a second choice, it would be option 1.
Okay. And have we talked to them? And I mean, I see that there's a big timeline here, but like, are they able to start next week? I mean, when we talk about, yes, there's a time period, but are they able to start as soon as possible?
Option 2, I did talk to them, and they said that as soon as we know that that's the direction that council wants us to go to, or with, that they would be able to start within a reasonable time after we say that. I wasn't given a specific date, but it'd be very reasonable, because I am stressing that we need to have our books caught up so that we can meet a June 30th timeline for our 23 audit.
Yep. Okay.
I would like to make a recommendation that we look at option 2.
Consensus is?
Option 2.
Fine.
Option 2.
2.
Okay, with that consensus, both Audrey and I will be contacting the people that we need to contact. And it's our anticipation that we will have a resolution for you on Monday, the 13th.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey.
Okay.
Okay,
Administrative services.
last one is a proposal for city administrator search.
Yes, we received 3 proposals, again, designated A, B, and C. I have reviewed those as well. And one proposal or one company offers us 2 different proposals. One is called the full service and one is called a partial service. In reviewing them, I also want to indicate that the cost associated with each varies. We have a low of $21,500. That is for the partial service. And the high, depending on what the wage compensation is, varies, and that is with option C. I just plugged in a number, said if the compensation offered, wage compensation was $140,000, you would be looking at a fee of $42,000. It is essentially double what the others are offering.
That was C, you said?
That was C, yes. That is a percentage.
And
I
is that
did
based on what the job description would say and what the range would be, the salary range would be?
The salary range would determine the fee.
Right,
And
30%, yeah.
30% of whatever was offered.
Yeah,
and
but
accepted.
do we have an idea of what that is? Are we gonna just look at what we had previously for that job description and that salary range?
We will be looking at the city administrator job description, yes, and the salary range in conjunction with our human resources has given me a number of different salary ranges for this position.
What did we budget for the search again?
50.
Was it 50? Okay.
Yes.
So, do you have a recommendation?
I do. I think option B would be, in my opinion, the best option for us. One, I think that they established also a timeline for us. In their proposal, they laid out the tasks and they laid out a timeline. Very similar to others. They're looking at potentially, at the earliest, a 3 to 4 month search, interview, decision, offer, acceptance. But they lay out the tasks, and I think that was very important for us in our recruitment for this position. I have talked to I have talked to 2 or 3 entities that have used this particular group, and they have found it very, very acceptable. And I know myself, believe it or not, they are sending me also as just a person who occupies this position, materials for other communities. Of course,
What do you mean by that?
well, they send out emails, they send out text messages indicating there is a position available in Timbuktu. Here's the salary range. We know you're not listed with us, but would you be interested?
Okay.
I thought that was interesting and good. They are a well-respected entity, and that would be my recommendation.
I guess, myself, I also like option B. My only drawback about this whole thing is when we come with the timeline, do we really want to bring candidates up here in January or Feb when it's 15 below with a 30-mile-an-hour wind chill? I prefer
Spring.
spring with this. Have them come, do the interview process with potential candidates in April, May.
And I would push back against that and say, I feel that we have so many things that we're in process of doing as a city that I think the sooner we can get them here, the better. And if they can't cut it now, what's to say they can't cut it next year when it's January? I mean, it's the reality of where we live.
I don't think it's
You know?
weather has anything.
I just think you get a potential candidate crop when it, later in the spring and summer.
I feel too
I do
that, oh,
too.
excuse me, Delane.
I mean, I feel the same as you, Dale. It's just, it's similar to people don't sell houses in the wintertime. It's not a good time to sell, and just situations like that. I think for a situation like this, I think when we bring somebody to the community, we want to have it in our best environment, so.
And I would assume that these people that are applying for this job, they're gonna look at what
Yeah.
our weather is and what we got going on and stuff, as a year, depending where they're coming from,
My other issue too is, let's say if you're getting a candidate pool out there with, that is possibly looking, and they got a family or something, they got kids in school, my feeling is that they're not really gonna be looking until spring. Wherever they're at, if you get a good candidate that wants to be here but got kids in school, they're gonna wanna finish out the school year or wherever they're at before they come here.
Yeah, I think that's the best time also.
I guess the other thing I would, again, push back against that is if you do give an offer letter in February, then that gives there to be a little bit of overlap between the current city administrator and the new city administrator with that individual, and that they then can get their things in order so they're ready to come in after school's out.
But it is right back to my first point, I really don't think it's a good time to bring candidates here in January or Feb when it's the, and then who knows, you're bringing candidates in, who knows if there's a snowstorm moving in that week.
So what's the consensus for everybody is the consensus is April, like we're talking about, or earlier?
April's
I'd
fine.
say April or May.
Well, you're not
April-
bringing
April or
candidates
May
in
is
until
fine.
January,
April,
February,
or May
right?
is fine.
So would we start, but we'd start the process,
You would
let's
start
say
the
March.
process before that.
In
Start
March
the
to have them
pro-
come in April.
I
Start the
think,
process a little later.
I think what I'm hearing you say is that if B is selected, you want me to contact them and find out if we can engage them, but give them a different timeline than right now.
Right.
Right.
And what would your consensus be as to when
they
I should
said-
indicate to them we should start? Because there is a process of
They said how many
preparing
months?
brochures.
Well, whenever we start to have people here, maybe May or June is what I'm thinking. I mean, maybe April's even a little soon to have people come here. I'm thinking May would be a good time.
Well, when the trees.
And I can work back from that.
Right.
But see if we can engage them now
Right.
and then indicate what the consensus is. of-
Or maybe ask their opinion and say, hey, through their vast experience of doing this, what's the best time to be?
Absolutely. I can engage in that conversation with their representative who's indicated here, if that's what you
Yeah,
would.
so-
I would prefer
Sounds
a
good.
March, April on-site interview deadline.
Yeah, I don't. I would prefer a May,
April.
June.
I would say also from my experience, March is the month where the least amount of people apply for jobs.
Yep.
Yep. I would recommend that we take option B.
Yep. Consensus is for B.
Yes.
Okay, now,
I'm with
What
delaying on the
I am too.
delaying the timeline.
closer to June.
I'd
Where all
rather
the
have
trees are
May,
up.
What was the month, May again?
May or
What?
June.
May or
May,
June?
June, somewhere in there, yeah.
That's
I
fine.
would prefer May.
Or if there's something that,
We'll find
We'll
out from
find out
talking
from-
to them about what they recommend based on their experience.
The best practices dictate that, they're gonna be shaking the trees to see what comes out. And depending on the pool that they provide for us, there's going to be a series of stages.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, there's possibility that the first round of discussions about potential candidates is all done virtually,
And they did
that
indicate
can happen
that.
in March.
Well, you can.
That can happen in May.
They indicated an interview process, a one-time video.
Yeah.
But what I will do is, one, if you have a consensus, there will be a resolution for your consideration on Monday for option B. In the meantime, in conjunction with our other selection, Audrey and I will be talking to these people about what is their best practice, what do they find appropriate, and what are they recommending?
Sounds good.
Well, it's also like Morgan mentioned, nobody's really looking at March, so you could ask that question too. What the preferred timeline is if they
Well, and I
think.
think the search is very different depending on the particular type of job. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration. I also would like to just put it out there that, if maybe you don't find good candidates this first time, you're gonna have to redo this process. And because it is a significant amount of time, I think that we really need to make sure that we're being conscious of that as we do this. But I think that there's a lot to be done, and I'd really like to see this done sooner than later.
I guess, option B will give us the information and expertise that they know.
I will be contacting them tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah, if you could just forward us their thoughts on best practices, that'd be great.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good job, man.